Hi, I'm Helen. Welcome to my studio and welcome to my Making Space for Crafts printmaking workshop. As this is a video workshop, you can pause, rewind, fast forward and replay as many times as you like. The aim of the workshop is to introduce you to some basic printmaking techniques. We're going to be using bits and pieces that you can find around the home or forage, or things that you can easily get hold of. You don't need any fancy equipment for this workshop. The idea is to get you enthused, give you the basics, get you started and encourage you to go off and try some more. Today we're going to be printing our own tote bags. So I've made a start on one here. Let's have handles, there we go. And I'm going to be doing a little bit more work on this today. What I'm going to be showing you is how to make a range of different print blocks and how to use different objects that you probably already have lying around to make different prints. We'll look at making pattern rollers, using objects from around the home to print, and using natural objects, such as leaves, to make unique and beautiful prints. Hopefully, by the end of the workshop, you'll have a beautiful, unique tote bag, and you'll be encouraged to try more and get going. I want to start by showing you some of the print blocks that we're going to make today. I'm going to show you how to make a print block made from string and cardboard. This one even has a handle. I'm going to show you how to make your own stamps using corks and bits and pieces from around the home. I'm going to show you how you can use natural objects and found objects to create prints. I'm going to show you how to make your own print roller for making repeating patterns. And we'll also be having a bit of an experiment playing with different materials. I've got some sequin waste here that again we can use to make patterns and decorate our fabrics and papers. I would suggest that you start off with some bits of scrap paper and fabric just to practice, and once you've got a hang of the techniques you can then start to think about designing your tote bag and get that printed up. Before we get going, I just want to have a little chat about some of the things that we're going to be using in this workshop. So first off, we need some things to print with. Have a little look around the house, go out in the garden, go for a walk, see what you can find that you think will make interesting prints. Just to give you some ideas, I've got cotton reels, corks if you're a wine drinker, bottle tops often have interesting patterns on, buttons, bits of lace, bits of old fabric that you don't mind cutting up if they've got a good texture. It's also really good source of inspiration is nature, so go and get some different kinds of leaves. This is a great time of year for collecting leaves as they're all falling off the trees and looking particularly beautiful. Might give you a bit of colour inspiration as well. To make some of the print blocks that I mentioned earlier, it's also useful if you've got some scraps of cardboard, some string, very difficult to make string pins without string. Need some PVA glue to stick things with, a cardboard tube. Alternatively, if you've got a rolling pin that you don't mind sacrificing, you can use a rolling pin to make your roller, but a cardboard tube works just as well. You also, if you've got any bits of funky foam, craft foam lying around, these are really good for making stamps with. If you haven't got this, then the thin sheets of polystyrene that you sometimes get in food packaging work really well, or you can use thick card or thin sponge. The cellulose cleaning sponges that you get, you know, the thin ones, they're great for this as well. So don't worry if you haven't got craft foam, it doesn't need to be that. That's just what I happen to have lying around. So we've got some things to print with. We're going to need some things to print on. Before you make a start on your tote bag, I'd recommend that you have a little bit of a play around and a bit of an experiment. So I've got some scrap fabric and some bits of scrap paper that I'm going to be experimenting on. And I'll use these to demonstrate some of the techniques before we get cracking on our tote bags. So we've got something to print with, something to print on. We're going to need some form of printing ink. I'm going to be using fabric paint today because that's what I've got. But if you haven't got fabric paint, don't worry. If you've got acrylic paint, then you can get hold of some textile medium and mix this about 1:1 ratio with your acrylic paint, and what it will basically do is turn it into fabric paint. and it's got a really nice consistency for printing with. At a pinch, you could just print onto fabric with acrylic, but you'll find it'll get very stiff. If you can get hold of some textile medium and mix that in, it will make the paint much more flexible, and once it's been fixed with an iron, then it's washable as well. So I would recommend you try and get hold of some of this if you're planning to use acrylic paint. Obviously, if you're just going to print on paper, it doesn't matter, you don't need the fabric medium. It's also really useful if you've got a print roller. If you haven't got a print roller, don't worry, we can do all of the techniques in this workshop without one, but it is handy. It's even more handy if you've got two, one for rolling your paint out and one to use as a clean roller to press things. But it really isn't essential. Things that you could use as a substitute include a rolling pin, the back of your hand, a paint roller, all sorts of things you could improvise. You could even improvise by using a cardboard tube. So if you've got a roller, that's great, but don't worry if you haven't got one. The other thing that's really useful are paint trays. Again, if you haven't got a paint tray, just improvise. An old plate, an old food tray, a bit of card, anything like that will work. At a pinch, you could use newspaper, but I'd try and avoid it because after a while, the moisture in the paint, in the fabric paint, will make the newspaper degrade and you might end up with it kind of disintegrating and mixing in with your ink, which obviously isn't ideal. A couple of other bits and pieces that will be useful to have: a pair of scissors, a couple of brushes. Old tatty paint brushes are fine, don't need anything fancy for that. And it's also useful if you've got a big bit of cardboard to go inside your tote bag so that the ink doesn't seep through to the other side. That's one of my Blue Peter, here's one I made earlier moments. So we've got our materials, we've got all the equipment we need. Just going to have a very quick chat about workspace and then we'll be ready to get printing. Give yourself as much room as you can. I'm working at my desk today, so I've got a nice big desk, which you'll see in a minute, and I've got all the things that I need around me so that I can easily get them and show you what I'm doing. You obviously don't need a dedicated space for this. You can use the kitchen table if that's the space you've got. Just make sure that you cover surfaces because the printing ink is permanent. It won't necessarily wash out, particularly of things like carpets. So if you're working in a carpeted room, make sure you cover anything that you don't want to get inky. Also a good idea to cover yourself. I've got my apron on today. If you've got sensitive skin, you might want to consider wearing gloves. I'm a very messy worker, so I'm just going to get covered in paint and wash it off. But do bear in mind that it can stain occasionally. You might end up with slightly colourful fingers for a little while. It's also good if you've got access to a sink because obviously you're going to need to wash things out. You don't need to use lots of water during the process, but try and avoid having too far to trek to the sink in case you've only got one of things and you need to wash them out in between while. So we've got our space set up, we've got our materials, we've got our equipment. Let's get printing.